can applaud her if you like.
Oh. And him.
Thank you so much all for coming here this evening. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet today on the traditional lands of the Kulin people. I would like to pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. And I would like to thank our guest, Carmel Johnston, for coming all the way from the States to speak with us this evening. Carmel's an environmental scientist. She was of course, the most recently crew commander on NASA's, and I'm going to have to use this, Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation, or HI-SEAS project. And I have a sneaking suspicion that those words might have been chosen to spell out high seas, but I don't want to get into that just yet. Maybe a bit too cynical. This project involved Carmel spending a year in a dome, essentially about the same diameter as this building is wide, for a year with 5 others. And her research at that point was into long-duration survival, the monitoring of the health of the crew, food and habitat. And, making sure no one killed each other, yes. Right? Because as humanity ventures into space in these long-duration missions, it will be our fellow astronauts who pose the greatest risk to us, but also the greatest potential for our survival through our combined skills and teamwork. So with that, if I could be cheeky, could I get a second round of applause for Carmel?
Thank you.
Okay, so you're 2.5 kilometers above sea level on the edge of a volcano. An environment very far from the lush Hawaiian landscape, more hellish. Sealed in an isolated dome about the width of this room with 5 others for a year. I'll just ask the obvious question. Why? Why would you do this to yourself?
I think all of the crew members, especially for my crew, but all the crews before us, I was the 4th mission, so there were 3 missions of crazy people before me, and there were a few after us as well. We each had our own individual reasons for wanting to do it, as well as we all felt this higher calling of wanting to do and participate in the research that's necessary in order to get humans to deep space, whether it's Mars or beyond. And also, all the research is applicable to places on Earth as well. So it's kind of this, double dipping of we get all this research for future of space research, but then we also have all the applications here on Earth as well. So we're benefiting humanity in both ways. So That's a pretty feel-good story for deciding to sign up for it.
Okay. So is that how NASA tried to sell it for you, and then you discovered when you were in there that you could only have a shower every 3 days or something? NASA
and the HI-SEAS program, who's run through the University of Hawaii, they pretty much sold it as you can live in a dome for a year, and that was most of it. And then it was all the details that came afterwards. We're okay, that sounds cool. All right, yeah, I could do that. And then we just all got really excited about it, and it kept building from there.
Yeah. So have you always had this fascination with space, or that I guess, have you always been touched in that way by having a greater calling, wanting to be part of a bigger thing?
Specifically space research, I haven't necessarily been interested in my whole life. I've always been interested in space and environmental science of any kind, or any science really. But I didn't really know that space research was a thing until I got through college, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's totally a thing. And I don't know if that was just my upbringing or where I was at, and it wasn't really a well-researched area. And so, yeah, I've definitely always had the higher calling to want to do something. And I think all of us probably struggle with the feeling of not knowing what we're doing with our lives or what we are contributing to necessarily society, but also humanity as a whole. And so I was kind of selfishly hoping that at least one thing I do will contribute to the betterment of humanity.
I don't think that's selfish. I think that's incredibly noble. That's fantastic. So let's, if there's such a thing as a standard day, Can you just talk us through it? What actually happens in the dome?
Yeah, so each day of the week was different, but every week was very similar. So there kind of is a familiar week. I would wake up fairly early because I am an early riser, and would find like a dozen or more emails in my inbox. And it's not just like an email that says, oh, hey, good morning. It's like, you need to do all these things. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to take me all day to get through this. So I'd start trying to get through all of those. Some of them could be a quick reply. And then as people started waking up, then we'd have breakfast together. We wouldn't necessarily all have breakfast together as a whole group, but we'd pair off or we'd have people come and go. We had different research projects that happened at different times of the day. And so if we knew we had a research project that had to happen in the morning, we would plan on having things happen in the afternoon. Or if it was a midday thing, it'd be like, okay, get breakfast and a few things done in the morning, do your research task, and then do a couple other things in the afternoon, and then it's dinner time and bedtime, and your day's gone. So in the middle, we had to fit in exercise. I was growing a bunch of plants, or a couple of us were growing plants, and cooking food became a giant task because we were cooking everything from freeze-dried, dehydrated, and powdered ingredients. And so it took a lot of time to hydrate everything up and then cook it like you would normally. So it just takes time.
Speaking of the food, did you actually get to choose? Did you have like a menu list of here's my must-have items? Like for me, that would just be chocolate. Like every day, I would need vast quantities of chocolate to get me through this.
I ate a lot of chocolate.
Yeah. Oh, good. I could do it then. Okay.
Yeah. My major food groups were freeze-dried fruits, vegetables, chocolates. I threw some meat in there occasionally, but we didn't necessarily have a whole list of things we could choose from. It was more, what would you guys like to eat? And so if we wanted turkey instead of beef, or peas instead of beans, or whatever, they would find the same supplier who could provide it for us. And I guess ideally we would have been able to grow all of our own food, but we were in a culturally sensitive area of Hawaii where you can't have any more impact on the land. And the only reason why we were able to be there is because we were in an already impacted area. Mm-hmm. And so we couldn't do anything additional onto that land. So we had to be completely self-contained, and there just was not enough space to grow all of our food.
Fair enough. Is this a hermetically sealed environment? I guess I'm asking, can you smell the outdoors? Or are you that isolated?
No, we didn't smell the outdoors. There is an air circulation system within the dome, and it's not super technical because it's not a proper life support system, but it is sealed off from the outside. You couldn't smell the outside, and even when we went outside in our suits, we couldn't smell it either.
Of course, because every time you're on Mars, right?
Yeah.
So you can't leave the dome without your suit on.
Right, yeah. Okay. You would die.
I'm just trying to get a sense here of what. So I know you grew up in Montana, or you studied in Montana, and a big fan of the outdoors. Why would you? Perhaps a better question is, how did you survive in that kind of a sterile environment?
The way I chose to look at it was, I knew that I was going to miss all of the outdoor things that I like doing, but this was so different and so unique and so cool that I got super stoked on it. And getting to go explore this entirely new landscape, none of us had ever been to a landscape like this before, was so interesting that it kept us engaged the whole entire year. We didn't get bored of walking out there. And my crewmate Christiana and I, she's the German gal, she and I were, adventure buddies, and we just go on exploring EVAs because after we got all of our geology, we got all the research done first, and then we got to explore. We would just go learn about the landscape, and it was so neat to just be able to wander out there and see and kind of question, why is this the way it is, and what happened in the past history to make all these different ridges go the way they do. And we were rock nerds, so we spent a lot of time out there.
So what sort of tools did NASA give you for your research? I guess NASA is really wanting this to be a Mars simulator, and one of the key reasons to go to Mars is scientific endeavor.
Yeah, so most of the research, so the idea of the project is to focus on studying the social and the psychological aspects on the humans with the constraint of isolation and confinement, and there's another constraint of the conditions of Mars. And so they weren't going to be able to give us complete life support systems because it's a lot of money, and the money was better spent doing everything else. But they're taking all of this research and statistics and applying that to the human condition, which is a really complex topic to begin with. And so we had all sorts of different ways of trying to study what humans do. So we had different badges that we could wear, and it's just like a little necklace that's got a plastic bit on it. And it's essentially a proximity sensor that tells how we're interacting. And if we're facing each other, then it says, oh, we're this distance apart from each other, and the temperature is this, and the light conditions are this. And if it's dark and it's quiet, it means we're actually probably sleeping. But if it's light and noisy, something else is going on. And they wanted to see if they could predict disagreements or arguments from occurring beforehand and find those precursors. So are there things that are going on with interactions weeks or months in advance before a giant blowout happens, that they can say, oh, wait, actually, X, Y, and Z just happened. We know that the argument happens after that. We send an email to the crew that says, we want you to consider talking about these things because we think that you might be having a stressful situation right now. And
which must be incredibly helpful in a stressful situation, right?
Like, being told you're stressed, you're like, no kidding. So yeah, the idea, they were studying that on all of us because they want to be able to send that technology to Mars or to deep space or anywhere. And if you can prevent a giant blowout from happening, that will have a lot of impact on your crew dynamics and crew morale. And having arguments isn't a bad thing necessarily. It's more about how you move past it, or if you can prevent, the giant thing from happening and have some discussions along the way that allow you to work better together. Maybe that's a better approach towards going to it.
In terms of, you mentioned stressful situations, do you have any that you can share with us where, someone just kept eating your freeze-dried turkey or whatever it was that you were enjoying at that point? What was the most challenging or stress-inducing moment in your year?
Stress-inducing moments for us didn't necessarily always come from the crew that we were there with. A lot of it came from communication. And I mean, every disagreement always comes from communication, right? So part of the struggle was that we had a 20-minute delay from our email on simulated Mars to Earth. And then the person on the other end had to decide to respond to that email, and then we could get the message back. We didn't have instant communication with texting or phone calls or social media or any of the other things people do to talk to, Skype, apparently. And so it was that delay, and people on Earth can be having a conversation. They can be talking about everything and figure out the world's problems, but they still have to tell us about it. And so if we had a problem, say, one of the times was that the water system broke, we would send a message saying, we noticed this, we tried this, we'd love your feedback on it. And then it'd be like a little while later, like, did you guys get our message? Can you tell us that you actually heard back from us? And then we go, oh yeah, we're talking. Like, okay, cool. Thanks for telling us.
Yep. So that delay, of course, is because Mars is so far away. It takes light up to 20 minutes, or in fact even more to get back. So has NASA now instituted the policy of at least just, sender received? I would have thought that was kind of just polite.
Well, receiving it doesn't necessarily mean read either, though. And so read and acknowledge. So we moved to the system of whenever you get a message from somebody, you just send a quick acknowledge to it. And that's something that we miss in everyday life here, and I'm so frustrated by it sometimes. I'm like, just say you got it. I don't care if you take 4 weeks to respond to me. Just say that you got it in the first place, so I'm not wondering.
So, because when you get an email sent, right, you're like, I need you to reply to this instantly.
Yeah.
We've gone you, but that must have been a nice thing to wean yourself off that instant reply. I'm an addict. I'm sure a lot of the audience here might agree. It's a nightmare, the pressure you feel to instantly reply. So having that time, that wasn't a benefit in some way?
That happens if you only have one email in your inbox. But if you're continuously replying to several emails and then you start getting things coming back in the middle, then it can get really confusing. But in general, if maybe you just decided, okay, I'm done with this for a bit, you could hit send and go do something else entirely and then not expect to hear back from them for at least an hour, and you could go for a run or you could go cook something and come back and be like, okay, now I have a fresh mind and I'll start working on more things. So
you mentioned going for a run. I'm guessing this isn't in your suit outside. So in this tiny dome, you have a kitchen, a toilet, which we'll get to, and then and a workout gym?
Yeah, we had a large common space. That was actually a majority of the habitat was this common space that could be multi-purpose. So we had a treadmill, we had desks and tables where we could work or have dinner, and then some workout space where we could build construction projects in our free time. So we had a treadmill. That was the major exercise equipment we had. We also had a stationary bicycle, but that wasn't really exercise. And if you're feeling really ambitious, you could put on a backpack that had weights in it and run up and down the stairs. But that makes the dome shake, and so people got kind of mad at me when I do that because it's like the only way you can actually get like an elevation gain. So it was good to do, but you have to warn people before you do that.
You literally shake their world. Yeah.
Well, it's just the way that the structure was designed, and it just moves the entire building.
Okay. So you've got your regular training, your regular meals, everything's planned for you. I find it fascinating that you mentioned this before, you didn't get bored over the course of weeks and those stretching onto months and year and ultimately a year. Have you got any tips to share of how we could all do that? Because some of my daily tasks kind of kill me, I've got to be honest with you.
Yeah, I would say we didn't get bored, but we certainly did get burned out at times.
Okay.
We definitely did get run down and tired of doing some of the same things. But when that happens, then we just hit a quick reset and maybe take a couple hours to just do your own thing for a bit. But a lot of people ask if we were just sitting around. Like, I guess people watch this movie called Biodome, and I wouldn't recommend it. It's really not that great. And it's nothing like what we were doing. We weren't just sitting around. We were actively doing things all day long. And I guess to be bored means you have to have an ample amount of time for free time. And we didn't have Netflix or any other ways to stream movies. And so we just found work to do. So we were growing plants or watering them. And every one of us was kind of coming and going from exercise because you have to work around each other to everybody get to use the equipment. And so there was just always something to do. There's always something that breaks. Like, you guys are all homeowners, right? There's always a project to work on. And that was always the case for us too.
Yeah. I guess especially when your life depends on it, right? That does help focus the mind.
Maintaining your systems is really important because it is supporting your life.
Okay, so there's another famous dome-based movie called The Martian. I think maybe some of us may have seen it several times. Love you, Matt Damon. And in that movie, famously, there is a source of fertilizer.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, I'm going to guess that probably wasn't used with the ample food supplies you had. But what were the demands? I think you were limited in terms of water, at least.
We were limited to water. We would go through about 1,000 gallons, and now I'm being an American and not knowing the conversion, 3,740 liters, maybe, of water once every 6 weeks. And so it was less than 16 liters per person per day for water that we were consuming. And so if you limit the amount of water you can take in and can move to something, then it does limit the amount of waste you have. But ideally, we would have been able to use all of our compost to grow plants, and that would be the most efficient use of all of that compost. We were able to use all of our food scraps to make fertilizer for the plants. We also did use our own urine for fertilizer, and I now have a whole bunch of parents in Montana that are really mad at me for telling their kids they can pee on plants and fertilize them. But it's like the best fertilizer we have, and we pee it out every day, and we just flush it down the water.
You don't have to treat it?
No.
Like, you can literally pee on it?
Yeah, I mean, you should aim for the ground underneath it. Don't aim for the leaves, but yeah. Don't aim for the edible part, but yeah, like that's...
Oh, sorry. Okay, I did not know that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, well, especially if you take a multivitamin, you're you're peeing out all these nutrients every single day that the plants want as well. And so
plants need potassium.
It's literally liquid gold.
All right. The other water restrictions, as you mentioned, 16 liters per person per day. It's clearly going to limit the amount of showering and bathing rituals. So how do you, did you ever get an awkward moment where you had to just tell someone they probably should spend more of their water rations that day? Or not?
No, actually, and because we're at such a high elevation, it was really low humidity, we didn't really sweat that much. And even when I'd run on the treadmill for hours, I wouldn't sweat at all. And so I think it was like the combination of all the fans and the active cooling with the humidity or the lack of humidity that really helped that out. But you could take, a sponge bath, or I ended up washing my hair more than once a week just because I could. And if I saved all my water from taking a shower, on the day I did take a shower, I could save like the rinse water from the beginning and then reuse it later because it's only been used once. And it's just shampoo water. So it's perfectly fine to rinse again.
Is anyone feeling like they want to go to Mars right now? Yeah.
You get used to it. It's not really that bad. I mean, when you go camping, or you guys have had droughts before too, where you have to really limit the amount of water you take in, and you get good at multi-purposing and recycling. You could even filter your water again. We could filter our shower water and use it to water the plants, or we would use it for mop water, washing dishes, stuff.
So those kind of lessons, not just extreme technological solutions to water recycling, so like the International Space Station would have, but yours are more societal based. It's on a bigger scale in that sense that hopefully we could all employ.
Yeah, what we did was really just from our own experience in conserving water, and most of the crews have gotten better each mission because they've had improvements, and we've all gotten better at conserving water. But most of the techniques we used was from our life experience of you're in a drought, so you conserve less water, or you conserve more water and you use less. And the easier way to use less water is to just reduce your consumption from the front. It's not necessarily recycling is good, but it's much harder to recycle than to just use less to begin with.
Yeah.
So
hopefully a lesson for any of the younger audience members here. To pee on your plants.
Yeah,
and
aim at the bottom. That's the key.
Yeah, and to wash your hair in dirty sink water. The parents will thank me for that. Okay, so we had this idea of the research, and there was the projects like Mental Block, I think it is, or some actual research that hopefully will find its way into society and to mitigate arguments. What about the actual structure, the location itself? Hawaii is a fascinating place, and I'm just fascinated to know what could you learn about it sitting in gloves and sitting behind a really horrible helmet.
Yeah, so the location of the dome was chosen specifically because it's one isolated away from all of the human beings. It's still close enough that they can get to us if we had an actual emergency, because we're still guarded under International Review Board rules that says our lives can't actually be in danger, and that's just a function of being a human test subject essentially. And so it was close enough that they could rescue us within a day. It's not really a real rescue. Luckily, nothing bad happened. But it was just because it looks a lot like Mars, too. It's this barren landscape. I wish I could show a photo to them about it, but it's just lava rock for as far as the eye can see, and it looks a lot like Mars because that's every image you've seen of Mars is maybe some sandy soil on the top, but it's all lava rock, and very unweathered at that. And so, yeah, it was chosen specifically because it looks a lot like that. And then a lot of the research tasks of going outside, learning about the landscape, are geared towards when humans do first go to Mars, they're going to have to start walking around and learning about their landscape. And we can see a lot from the satellites that are above it, but you're not going to know for sure until you go there. And that's one of the biggest arguments for sending humans to Mars, is that there are a lot of places that rovers and robots and satellite orbiters cannot go, and you have to have a human to be able to do that.
Look, seriously, sign me up. So far, I'm not weirded out by any of these water restrictions. But in terms of how do I phrase it? Would I make the cut? What does NASA look for? What was the crew selection for your year-long mission, and how much will that influence perhaps the NASA selection for Mars?
Yeah, so right now NASA looks for candidates who have a degree in a STEM field, and you have to be able to pass the psychological battery that they have. And they don't necessarily tell you exactly what they're looking for, because I don't think they want you to know what you have in you necessarily. But some of the good qualities that we would look for are people that are adaptable. You have to be able to come into a situation and follow a schedule and do what you're told, but also if something goes wrong, you have to be able to act immediately and be reactive right then and there, and you can't say, oh no, I can't do anything right now, I'm sending an email. I need to finish that, and then I'll fix the water issue later. Like, no, you have to move right now.
So in terms of those interpersonal skills, then, that must be, I mean, that would seem like an obvious one, that you don't want people who are, going to just lose the rag every day and just rip up, the side of the dome because, you didn't clear up the scraps or something, or feed it to the plants, or however you reused it. So do you know what NASA was looking for in retrospect, having looked at the rest of the crew, perhaps?
They look for people that have a long fuse. They want people that are extremely resilient and patient, and that are also easily entertained, because you're living in this space that doesn't ever change for a very long time, and you have to be able to find your own entertainment within that. You do have movies and videos that you can watch because it's stored on like a giant server for you. It's like 7 terabytes of movies, so that lasted us like 9 months. But you do have, all these other ways of entertaining yourself and having conversation or playing games together. And you can't be that person that has to be an adrenaline junkie. They're not looking for adrenaline junkies anymore. They're not looking for the type A, have to be best at everything. They're looking for more collaborative workers and people that are okay with, checking their ego at the door and saying, this is what's best for the entire group, rather than I have to be right all the time, because there's a good chance you're not right all the time. And if you can just accept that now, you'll be a much happier person.
Do you think you become a better listener, better communicator from this year? It seems incredibly intense conversations must have arisen.
Yeah, I'm definitely better at, I'd say, reading situations, and I think trying to react in an appropriate manner, because one of the things we found is that someone might react one way today, but then for some reason they're going to react differently tomorrow, and then the next day it's back to A, and then the next day it's C, and there's not necessarily a rhyme or reason for why people react the way they do, and there's so many complicating factors that you have no idea what's going on in their lives sometimes, because they may have gotten an email from home that says something bad happened, or a stressor with anything else going on that's not necessarily driven by the mission. And so trying to be understanding and accommodating to that, but also know that, the mission has to go on. And so you give them as many resources as they can to deal with that, but also working together and saying, okay, I'm sorry you're having a hard time right now, but your family is still here, and we are your family and your friends now, and we're going to work on this together with you.
So it really got that close? You really saw each other as family by the end?
Yeah, so, we only had 6 people, so all the different relationships that you have with each other in normal life, you have your spouses, your best friends, your exercise partner, the random person you see at the coffee shop once a week, and,
3 times a day.
Okay, 3 times a day, yeah. For coffee addicts, it's a bit more.
Yeah.
You meet down at the refrigerator 3 times a day for coffee. You have all these different roles that everybody serves in your life. You may have just confidants, or a person you don't ever talk to on a regular basis, but they're still your best friend. And when you see them again, you pick up like nothing ever happened. And these 6 people, or the 5 other people besides you, now have to fill all of those roles. Especially if you're going to be going to Mars or to anywhere further in space, maybe another solar system now, you would have to fill those niches for each other. And you can still communicate with your family and friends at home, but it's not the same as having someone there in the moment.
Yeah. You mentioned entertainment, and 7 terabytes is,
A lot.
Yeah, maybe about half of the Game of Thrones that Australia's downloaded. So clearly,
I can give you the rest.
Yes. What else could you do? I heard there was a ukulele. Is that right?
We had a couple ukuleles. Yeah, we had 2 ukuleles and a guitar and a didgeridoo.
Cool. I did not know that. Did that go down well? I'm just picturing someone trying to learn the ukulele, and I'm like, you're getting out of that airlock. Like, oh my god.
Well, you could zip yourself behind the airlock, and so it's not actually like a contained space.
Practicing the ukulele sitting out in the airlock?
Yeah, I would try to contain myself so that I would disturb as few people as possible until we got better, and then it was okay and it wasn't as disturbing. But you also try to do it at a day when people aren't trying to sleep, and if you try to practice while they're sleeping, they're not going to be very happy with you.
Yeah.
So
I think that is incredibly nice of you, but I guess it makes sense. You're learning that kind of consideration. You're being hyper aware of the people around you. So were there any big blowouts or big events. I mean, how were they managed? How did you, I guess, can you share those tips with us who we very rarely have to deal or be around the consequences of an argument, right? We can just walk out the door. Obviously, you can't. So what sort of general tips have you got that can actually mitigate or deal with the consequences of an argument?
It's super convenient. You can walk away from an argument here. I mean, I haven't been in any of those recently or since I've been out of the dome, but it's nice to just walk away. The major thing you have to do is, or at least we had to do, was to get on it early on. And that was one of the things that helped us, prevent having a major argument, was just saying how you feel and being open about your communication and what's going on with you early on, because someone might not know that the way you chew your food really pisses them off, and it happens. Like, we always have those people.
Yeah.
And if you just say, you know what, can you keep your mouth closed when you chew your food? Then they'd be like, I had no idea I do that.
Yeah, my wife's let me know.
Yeah.
Very early on.
And then you're like, okay, I'll do that. And then it's done and it no longer pisses her off, right?
She's got other things now. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm an endless
Then you pick
source.
the next one.
Yeah.
And then you start working on changing that person until they're the person you want them to be, not the person who they are.
Yeah, living in a dome, marriage, yeah, it's
Very similar. You can just have 5 other people you get to change instead of 1.
I'm not going to go there with that joke. Okay, so I guess I've always felt that space exploration is as much about humanity learning about itself, our place in the cosmos, our history, and hopefully our future. What is this experience, this concentrated experience of considering your own humanity and that of your colleagues, has that changed the way you view humanity?
That's a hard question. Thank you. That's a good one. I think it definitely has changed, especially being essentially stuck there where you actually have to focus on things. And we had to learn a lot while we were there. We were constantly learning about all the new things going on in space research, because NASA kept sending us news saying, hey, this is what's going on. And you're like, oh, cool, that's awesome. And yeah, in general, I think my main takeaway about humanity now is that we have to work together and we have to be on the same page. And the one thing we have in common is that we all live on the same planet. And it's not that we are 196 countries and we're all fighting each other for who knows what. And it's really unfortunate, a lot of things that are going on in the world right now. But I think what we should do is start working together on bettering humanity in general, so that someday if we do want to go to another planet, it's not that we're fighting each other to see who goes first. It's that we're working together to send the human race there. And, we're working on bettering us and maybe it is that we want to put humans on another planet as seeding another planet and a backup plan in case we're wiped out for some reason or whatever reason for wanting to go. We're only going to get there if we work together. We have so many smart people in so many different places that if we actually pooled our brain power together, we would be unstoppable. And right now, I think we're just fighting each other to be the best person. And that's all ego. That's not necessarily what's best for actual humanity.
Yeah. I guess being in a small dome, that really limits the size of your ego, right?
Yeah. You pretty much had to check it at the door and say, you know what, I don't know everything, but I'm going to learn a lot. And I'm going to try to be a better person in general. And if I'm doing something that bothers you, just tell me and I'll try to work on it. I can't say I'm going to fix it. I can't say I'm going to stop it completely, but I'll try to annoy you a little bit less.
Again, just like marriage. So I guess, what do you think the future... Actually, I should first ask, you mentioned one of the reasons often given for going to Mars or trying to colonize Mars is to have a backup planet, right? Do you believe that? What's your rationale? What's your thinking behind it? I know you have the bigger goal and you're bought into that bigger vision, but what actually was it?
So my vision for going to Mars is more of a scientific background.
Yep.
And a lot of people that are signed up for who knows what program right now want to go just because they want to be the first person there. They think it's really great. They want to colonize. They want to put a lot of people there. I'm not super sold on that idea, and I kind of have to be careful about saying that just because people will probably start attacking me for saying that. But it's just, I want to go and study there. I want to have us go and not ruin it, because humans are really great at ruining things. I want us to go and learn about the life history of Mars and see these land formations and learn about why Mars is the way it is now, because it used to be a lot more like Earth. And there are lessons to be learned about Mars that can help us prevent making Earth be the way Mars is now, especially if we continue doing all sorts of different things. But I want to go and learn about it. And I think that's our one last great wilderness that we haven't touched and ruined yet. And it would be a real shame to go there and take that for granted, like we take Earth for granted right now.
What do you think future Martians, if we do manage to get there, how do you think those Martians will be changed or will have to change from how we are on Earth to be a success?
There's going to be a lot of changes that happen. One is, just the physical isolation from Earth means you're going to be disconnected from things going on. So you're going to start celebrating different holidays. You're going to start valuing things differently. One of the things we found during the Dome and during our year was that money had absolutely no purpose to us because you can't buy anything anyways. So we started valuing time and different resources because time is the one thing that we all have in common as well. And unfortunately, we didn't have an extra 37 minutes because we were still technically on Earth. But everything became an exchange of time. And it was saying, do you wash your clothes by hand because it's going to save you 120 liters of water? Or do you not wash them by hand, use the washing machine, and say, I'm going to go do something else during that time? Because, you might have something more valuable than that, but it's a decision you have to make. Or, are you going to cook a really nice meal because home-cooked meals have a lot of grounding to your family and your friends, and it makes you feel better in general. And at least I always feel better when I have a nice home-cooked meal, especially if it's cooked by my mom. And it's a great way to bond and have crew morale improvement and investment with the mission and that was one of the reasons why they were studying that at High Seas, is to see how we would react to cooking our own meals versus eating freeze-dried gunk all the time. And so just everything about how your life is up there is going to be totally different than here on Earth.
Yep. So basically a people where everyone learns to cook, doesn't have massive ego hissy fits, and values shared time and experiences rather than just accruing money.
Yeah, you're going to have to be really self-sufficient because supporting life up there is going to be creating an atmosphere that you can breathe. It's going to be creating water and food and a shelter that protects you from the radiation. Everything about that system could break. And luckily you're going to have redundancies and you're going to have the ability to test it out before we go there. But life on Earth is easy compared to that. We don't have a machine that gives us air. It comes naturally, and that's something I think we take for granted as well.
Yeah. I think these future Martians, with all those qualities I described and ecological awareness, they could potentially be the best of us, the best of humanity. That
would be super cool. I think they would definitely have a challenge on their hands, but they're going to essentially have to be the best of humanity just to survive there. And that's, I think it's going to take an international collaborative group to get there because, it's not one country that is better than any other. We have to pick and choose the best out of everybody and work together.
We're nearly time for your questions, but I just wanted to ask perhaps the obvious final one, which was, what's it like being back on noisy, busy, smelly Earth?
It's noisy. It is so noisy. I like to refer to the spacesuits as a sensory deprivator because essentially you have this giant suit on you and you can't smell. You can see kind of okay, but not that great. You can't feel anything really because you have to get the gloves on, and you can pick up something, but you can't actually feel the texture of it. You smell yourself. You hear the fans. All your senses are deadened, and even in the dome, it's really deadened because you have things going on around you, but it's not the same as Earth and not as many noises. I'm super overwhelmed by noises in general now. Large groups of people talking different conversations, I can't pay attention to it all. And I know you can only pay attention to 1.4 conversations at a time anyways. And so, which is really...
Is that a real fact, by the way?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Or maybe it
might
be 1.6. But you can't pay attention to two conversations at once.
Yeah.
And so I have a hard time listening to one person talking and then another person, and then I only catch half of either one. And I feel really bad for not paying attention, or feeling like I wasn't paying attention, but I was really trying really hard to pay attention. And then it's just, so noisy cities are not my thing to begin with, but like quiet landscapes, quiet serene areas are really happy.
Okay. Yeah, luckily you're sitting in the middle of Melbourne, which is, the
It
serenity.
hasn't been that noisy.
The trams going by.
Yeah,
You don't think so?
Not as bad as other places I've been, and it's just been a quiet evening. I've only been here for like a few hours.
Okay.
There's time to change that.
Right. You came through Adelaide, though, as well, right?
Not yet. I go there in a couple days, yeah.
That place is dead. You'll just sleep like a baby. There's nothing going on after about 8 o'clock, so it's fine.
Because I've been in the outback, and that was really, really quiet. All the time you might hear a cow or sheep, and that was so peaceful.
Yep. That just took you right back to the dome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, look, I'm going to open up the floor to you all. If you could raise your hand, and we'll and wait till you get a mic from one of our two lovely assistants who are running up and down the sides. I would ask, could this question be a question? And I want you to actually, rather than perhaps pontificating at length, as I perhaps have done in my questions, I'm sitting on stage, so what can you do? So yes, if you could please make it an actual question, and we have one right at the front.
You mentioned that you had a German colleague, and I was wondering if that was explicitly done, that it was an international crew that you had, and if yes, what, if any, training you got in advance for how you would interact, because of course culturally it can be different.
Yeah. Luckily, both the German and the French participants spoke English, but their cultures are very different than ours. And so we found that something that is funny to Americans is totally not funny to Europeans.
The German has a bad sense of humor? Is that what you're saying?
No,
Okay.
She's got an amazing sense of humor. She's so funny, but it's a very well thought out funny, and then it happens and you're like, oh my gosh, that was like the funniest thing I've ever heard. So it's a long fuse for her jokes as well.
A 2-day build up.
Yeah, she's like silently in the back observing things, and then says something you're like, I never even noticed that, you're so right. So we did notice a lot of cultural differences. We didn't have a lot of training for that, specifically because they wanted to see how we interacted. And if you were on an astronaut crew that's training to go on a long duration mission, you would have years of training for all sorts of different things. And so we were slightly different in that aspect, in that they were kind of just trying to study the human condition. They want to see what our initial reactions were going to be, rather than prompting us with a bunch of, especially like decision making and problem solving. They wanted to know what, based on our backgrounds, how humans will naturally interact, rather than saying, oh yeah, I noticed that you're doing that, and that's making me feel this way. I think that we should do this. And, then it's kind of construed and fake. They just want to know the normal human condition. But yeah, the Europeans did not find our jokes really funny. And they also found that we talk way too much. And they'd sit there and we'd be like, wow, why are you guys so quiet at dinner? They're like, we cannot talk because you're talking. And they would have had something to say, but I don't know if Australians are always like this either, but Americans they're more conversation building in their head rather than listening to what's going on. And so they are like, someone's talking and then someone like interrupts them to start talking about their conversation rather than letting them finish. And the Europeans are like totally over it.
They're just praying for the vacuum seal to go, and then just the deadening of space.
Counting days down, yeah.
Yeah.
They had to be more assertive than we were, because it was just natural for us to talk over each other.
The situation is very artificial, and the big thing that is missing from your situation is that you're never going to die there, which is something that must be in the thought of Martians. When an accident's going to happen or an illness is going to happen, you haven't got that risk in what you've been doing. And the second thing I'd like to ask is, was the outside weather as variable as the weather on Mars?
Yeah, so we did not have the actual risk of dying. We did have an actual risk of getting injured, of course. But there isn't actually going to be a situation or a simulation that ever can give you that until you actually go to Mars. And so they can do their best to form a way to make it as serious as possible. And they can say, if you breach your suit, you're dead. And so, like, if we had taken off our suits outside, it would have been considered death and we would have had to leave the mission. And so they can do all these different things in order to make it as serious as possible. But, you're never going to get that experience until you actually go all the way there. That's the same reason why, we didn't have actual life support systems on our mission, because you can't put all the different pieces together until it's financially, until you actually are going there. And so everybody's kind of studying all these different avenues and aspects, and then we're going to get it together. And maybe they will have a proper simulation on Earth. That would be so cool to actually have, the crew go into a proper pod just like they're going to have on Mars, or they plan there. And then, they live there for a couple of years. That would be really interesting. I don't know that would happen. And the second part of your question was about, will you repeat it again?
The weather.
The weather. The weather was variable. And for the most part, when we would have cloudy weather come in, we would refer to it as a dust storm. And so the weather on Mars is very different, of course, but you're going to have weather anywhere on Earth as well. And so you could go to a desert where you have no clouds, and then you would never get that simulation of having a dust storm. And so we would have to mentally say, okay, this is what's going on. And for the most part, we didn't notice it very much either anyways. And the temperature was very similar as you would have on summer on Mars. So for us, it was not really having to suspend disbelief, but it was just a fact of reality, and that's how we lived as if we were on Mars.
Were you able to leave the dome during one of your dust storms?
No, we didn't.
So even to that degree of realism, they just kept you locked away when it was a
Yeah,
cloud.
if it was raining outside, we wouldn't go outside.
Yeah.
Which it didn't do very often. Or
Sure,
if it was
2.5
cloudy.
days out,
Yeah, if it's cloudy outside, you can't see anyway, so you're not going to.
You're in the cloud.
Yeah, you're in a cloud, so you're not going to be able to go anywhere anyway. So you would not be going outside for any kind of weather conditions.
Yep. All right.
Hi, I'm assuming that you had access to a calendar and knew how long was left in the mission. So I'm wondering, what was it like emotionally for you and the group in that final weeks, days, or hours till your release from the dome?
The final weeks, I'm not actually sure what happened during those. I was awake for them, but I don't remember a lot of that because I was a little sleep deprived. Time just flew by for us the entire time. We were busy with things. I wasn't sleeping very much in general because I'm a slight insomniac anyways. And if I get stressed, then I just stop sleeping in general. So that last bit is like at the end of summer holiday where you have your entire summer to get things done in a week or a couple weeks. And you start trying to fit in everything you wanted to do. And we were trying to finish up all of our research tasks. And we also had to pack to go back to Earth and, pack up things that we were not going to be using anymore. And so time just flew by really quickly. The cool thing that happened was we got to harvest all our vegetables for final. And then we had like this giant pile of kale that we couldn't force people to eat enough of. And so they had been complaining the whole year about not getting enough vegetables. And then here's this giant pile that they cannot stuff their face enough with. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, it was a very busy time for sure. Because if you stay busy, time will fly anyways. And I think that because we were so busy, we're not counting down the days at the end. It just flew by before we knew it.
Hi there. I'm just wondering, has there been a comparison done with people being isolated in Antarctica compared to your situation?
I don't know of the exact study that does that, but all of the data, especially if it's in America, if it's NASA funded, it's all publicly available afterwards. And so anybody could do that study if they want to. They do have different people going to Antarctica for varying lengths of time. And I know Concordia is going to have a mission coming up as well. And then the Mars Society is going to have a mission up at the North Pole. Theirs is a bit shorter. So no one else has ever done an entire year length before. But with all the other shorter missions, you certainly could make cross comparisons. The hard thing about that is if you're going to do an actual comparison, you have to have some common ground. And statistics gets really complicated if you have all sorts of different variables, but I'm sure somebody's smart enough to figure that out.
What did they finally conclude after your 12 months? Did they decide that, yes, it's possible to send 5 people into space for 5 years? And did they reach the same conclusion from all the other groups?
So they haven't released their report yet, and they haven't even told me what happened in our mission. I mean, I can make observations about what I lived through, but as far as all of the data behind it, I think more than saying it's possible to send humans to Mars, they're looking at compiling the correct crew and the correct personality composition that would lead to a crew being highly successful. So, I mean, I think it's absolutely possible that we can send humans to Mars for 5 years or for any duration of time. I would bet money on that it's possible to do that. It's more of like finding the technical aspect now of the human component, because if the human component breaks, it's just as detrimental as if the rocket ship breaks.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what they're more focusing on, not just like yes or no, is it possible, but how do you actually structure that so that you give enough training period, you have enough time working together so that everybody gets along, and or they have enough ways of dealing with conflict or disagreements that they can move past it and be a cohesive and functional group together.
I know that they're planning on, there's 2 more high seas, I think, planned.
There's at least 2. It depends
Yeah.
on how the funding goes. But
Yeah.
yeah, they're in the 5th mission right now. They're going to be 8 months, and then the 6th mission will be 8 months as well.
Wow, so no one's got your record.
Yeah, no one's going to get it for a little bit. I mean, I'm sure there are people wanting to break it, but I hope that they don't. I want to have a claim to fame for a little bit of time.
That's fair enough, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in the end, they're going to have to do a longer than 1 year mission to actually get that data. So.
Yep. Well, that's right. 6 months one way, maybe 3 months on the surface, 6 months back. That's the shortest kind of duration you can imagine.
Yeah, and it would be shorter than that because there's like the window in
Yeah.
which you can only launch in. So I think it's a 2.5 year round trip. If you have a way to launch yourself back, conditional doesn't exist yet. So we should be figuring that out too.
Hi. Was there anybody that did have a breakdown, and was there some sort of counseling or methods that you had to use, or mindfulness or meditation or anything like that you were using?
Yeah, we had a couple of the research projects actually were designed towards helping us self-treat all sorts of different conditions, but we had different tasks that we had to do for, like once a week, we would revisit an issue that we were having, and it was tailored to us, and you say, this is the issue I'm having, and you come up with some plans for how to deal with it, and you revisit it next week, and how did you actually work on that? So we did have counseling available, and we had a psychologist on staff. We had psychologists we met with afterwards, and nobody had like a full-on major meltdown, breakdown. No one walked out the door, and for the most part, we stayed pretty sane. But it depends. It could be a longer duration mission, and I can't really speak to if we would be able to make it for 10 years or something together, but we made it through 366 days, so that was pretty good.
To what extent did you have a choice in the tasks that you were doing and the activities that you were carrying out during the day, and to what extent were they kind of thrown at you by email for the week? And particularly from what you were just saying of people maybe on Earth kind of picking up on issues that you might have had the week before?
Yeah, so the condition on our experiment is that we were volunteers, and so everything had to be done voluntarily. And so at any point in time, we could say, no, I think this project's stupid, I'm not doing it. But nobody did that because we knew that the data that was collected from it was more valuable than just us saying, actually, on Mondays at this time, I want to do something else. So almost all of the research was given to us beforehand, and we knew exactly what we'd be doing every day, every week, with the gaps in between that we had not scheduled. At any point in time, yeah, we could have walked out the door. We could have dropped any of the research, but we all had the knowledge that we were there for the entire year. We weren't going to be dropping any of that stuff because what's the point of being there unless you're going to do the work? So
That's an incredible attitude.
yeah, it's then again, like you're on the job for an entire year. You don't get to go home. You don't get to visit your family. You don't get to really take a break, because even if you have a day off, you're still stressing out about something else going on or what you have to do tomorrow. So you never really get a reprieve from it until you get out and you sleep for like 14 hours for a couple weeks, and you feel a lot better after that.
Yeah, it does.
knew you were going to be there for a year, how would things have changed if you didn't know when you were going to leave?
That's a great question because I think the amount of time that you are given is really a factor for the amount of mental stamina it takes to get through a project or a mission, I'd say. If we had gone a year and then right at the end they said, oh, wait, sorry, you have another 6 months, we would have been really pissed. But, we could have done it, though. That's the thing is, once you've already gone a year and they were to drop that on it, you'd say, well, we've already gone 2/3 of the way down and it wasn't that bad, so of course we can go longer. Especially that has a link to, the Martian where they were going one direction, they had to turn around and go back again. And that totally changes the psychology of how you deal with things because the aspect of unknowing is really demanding on you mentally. And I don't necessarily know how the entire crew would have worked out if that had happened, but I know we've talked since then. We said, if you had to go, or even we talked during the mission, we said, what if we got to 8 months and they said, actually, you have another 8 months left to go, what would you do? And we had discussed that as a crew. And for the most, I think we were all in agreement that we would, of course, keep going. But
It's easy to say when you're back in your bed, right?
Yeah, right? Yeah. Totally.
I could have told you another 7 years.
Yeah, everybody says, oh, would you do it again? Yeah, of course I would.
Here's the contract. You're like, no, maybe later. Yeah.
Well, but then again, like the research that comes out of it, that's the only way you can get that data, is to physically isolate people, put them in a place where they can't have instant communication, where they live under as many of the constraints of living on Mars as you can possibly give it them. You're not going to get that any other way. You can study the human condition all you want in town or anywhere else, but you're going to relearn the same lessons until you actually stress them out and put them in a place and see what happens.
That's awesome.
I'm curious to what level your group was monitored and observed, and how you went about the psychology behind, the big brother feeling of being studied and watched for a whole year and not having time to yourself or being, real privacy.
So we had cameras that were in the dome, but they were not there to monitor everything that we were doing. They were more focused on this one area of the dome. They wanted to know if we were using this common space for different activities. And I think the idea was, is this common space actually valued? And is it useful to have this? So that was what the cameras were for. There were, the whole entire rest of the dome did not have cameras. And so it didn't feel a lot like Big Brother, but at the same time, we all had these surveys once a week that we were talking about how we were interacting with each other. We did over 3,000 surveys a piece during the year, like 10 a day. Everything from our stress levels to what we ate that day, exercise, who has interacted with who most recently, how that interaction went. Pretty much everything you can think of you'd want to know about somebody, they were studying it on us. And so we knew that you also had this idea of that if you didn't self-report, then somebody was going to be reporting on you anyways, so you might as well own up to it. And so, if somebody else says you're stressed out, but you're like, oh no, I'm not stressed out ever. And you're like, of course the researchers are gonna know you're stressed out, you're just lying. So lying on your surveys doesn't do you any good because they already know what's going on. And it's interesting that the researchers, they are so intuitive. They already know half the stuff that's going on before we even do, just because they can see the data as it's coming in. They're like, oh, we can predict this, we can predict that. And you're like, man, I wish I was that smart. But they just have enough experience with seeing missions come through before us that they know. So.
Oh, look, I can't wait to see the research that comes from your experiences. First off, I'd like to thank the audience for the great questions so far. I wish I'd asked those ones. Those were really good. So give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you, of course, to the Wheeler Centre for putting this evening on. And with a final rapturous applause, could you please thank the incredible Carmel Johnston.
Thank you. Thank you.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and the world.